supposed to prevent these types of atrocities from happening around the world. For months, we have seen the UN Security Council has not only failed to act, but has been paralyzed by the US veto that has blocked even the most basic calls for a ceasefire. And in response, we are seeing that many have turned to the United Nations General Assembly asking to evoke the Uniting for Peace resolution, which is a tool that was created decades ago to bypass the deadlock when the Security Council fails to uphold its duty and its responsibility to stop injustice around the world. But here's the question that we are here to confront today. What are the good tools of international law, or how good, rather, are tools of international law that can't stop a genocide in real time? The Uniting for Peace mechanism was designed to restore moral and political urgency to the global community. Yet today, it exposes the deep cracks in the system that was built to protect power and not people. Tonight, our panel is going to examine what this means, both legally, politically, and actually morally. Can international law still serve as a vehicle for justice when its most powerful bodies aren't complicit? Can the General Assembly, representing the will of the world's nations, rise to fill a vacuum left by the Security Council? I am humbled and so proud to be joined by people that are here not just to analyze this question, but to help us understand how do we actualize change during and midst the ambiguity, the confusion, the lack of certainty, and the deep mistrust towards the systems that we are surrounded by. So without further ado, I am happy to introduce the speakers that I'll be joined by. We have with us Ubai Aboudi, who is a steering committee member of the Palestinian NGO network, also known as PNGO. We have Lemis Deek, who is the Director of Legal and Political Affairs of PAL Commission on War Crimes, Reparations, and Return. We have Craig Mukhaiber, who is an international human rights lawyer and former UN human rights official. And I am so happy to be moderating this conversation. My name is Hazami Barmada, and I'm a social impact strategist and human rights advocate based in Washington, D.C. First, I just want to take a moment to welcome my amazing panelists. Welcome from everywhere that you are in the world right now. I'm going to start by, asking, the title of this event was called Uniting for Peace. And, some people have heard of this resolution. To some, it is still a bit confusing. So I'm going to open by asking maybe Craig and Lemis to chime in specifically on what is a Uniting for Peace resolution. Explain it to your average person that may not have been made familiar with the concept.
Well, thanks, Hazami, for having us here. So nice to be again with Ubai and Lemis and everybody. So the Uniting for Peace is a dusty old Cold War mechanism that was established in 1950 to deal with a problem with the architecture of the UN with which everyone here is familiar, that the veto in the Security Council can block action when it is most needed. It only takes the veto of one permanent member to block any action. That's why we've seen 6 United States vetoes during the current genocide in Palestine, a total of 50 vetoes by the United States just to protect Israeli impunity. And the question, as you framed it, is what the Uniting for Peace mechanism was meant to answer. What do you do when the Security Council cannot act because of the veto? And what the member states of the UN came up with is this mechanism called Uniting for Peace that allows the UN General Assembly to take action when the Security Council is blocked. The UN General Assembly is the more, let's say, democratic body of the UN because every country in the world is a member. They all have one vote and there is no veto. And that means that the global majority of states in the world, made up mostly of the global South, have the power to take action even when the US or one of the other permanent members of the Security Council doesn't want it to take action with a 2/3 vote in the General Assembly. It can pass measures to hold the Israeli regime accountable, and it can even mandate a protection force to travel to Palestine to protect civilians and perform other related functions. Basically, that's it. Now, Uniting for Peace has been used many times, including during this current genocide, but mostly to adopt resolutions that just call for a ceasefire, that are very symbolic, that don't do anything active. And here, what we're talking about is using Uniting for Peace to actually pass provisions that, for example, would call for sanctions on the Israeli regime, would call for a military embargo on the Israeli regime, would call for the rejection of the Israeli regime's credentials in the United Nations, could call for the reestablishment of the anti-apartheid mechanisms to deal with Israeli apartheid, could even establish some kind of accountability mechanism like a tribunal, and could mandate a UN protection force to protect civilians in Palestine. Let me finish with this one line. If it sounds like it's impossible, in 1956, the UN General Assembly used Uniting for Peace to mandate the UN emergency force that traveled to the Sinai at the height of the Suez crisis, helped to resolve that crisis, and helped to bring about the departure of French and British and Israeli troops that were committing aggression against Egypt at that time. There are precedents, it's legal, it's possible, and that's what we're trying to see if we can use this just as one small piece of the puzzle of solidarity and resistance in Palestine.
Thank you for that, Craig. Lamis, I'm going to ask you to expand specifically on this proposal. I know that we have heard about Colombia pushing this through. We heard some promises during the last session of the UN General Assembly that took place in New York a couple of weeks ago. So can you talk to us about the specific proposal? What does it set out to do? What are some of the components of it, specifically as it relates to where we are right now with Gaza? I think Lamis is with us. Lamis, are you with us or did we lose you?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Allah yarda alaykum. And thanks to the interpreters and the folks doing all the management, Adrian and yourself and everybody. I think the first thing that I'd like to make clear, which I think will clarify, is what is distinct about this resolution and the reason that it will survive regardless of any UN Security Council resolution that gets approved, which would have to be with the approval of the US, and regardless of any quote unquote ceasefire that's happening now, is that this resolution is intended to operationalize all of the Palestinian basic rights as reaffirmed for the second time at least by the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world. And those essentially revolve around the basic principle and premise of self-determination, and then all of the rights that flow from that. As the International Court said, I don't know which is the best. Can I say ICJ as an acronym or should I avoid ICJ as well, Adrian?
I think go
Okay,
ahead
so
once you've defined it once. Yes.
thank you. Yeah, so and as the ICJ articulated, right, the core central pillar of this resolution is self-determination. Certainly part of that is the protection of civilians, both in the West Bank, including Al-Quds al-Sharqiyya, East Jerusalem, and in Gaza. And from that flow all of these rights that are, non-derogable, i.e. non-negotiable, right? They should never be subject to negotiation: self-determination, compensation, satisfaction, and the end of occupation, apartheid, and genocide. Those are the four pillars. And from there flows the operations of the multinational force, right? And from there also flows the obligations of other states, whether they're part of the multinational force that's going to be involved in this. And that is the arms embargo, the sanctions, the duty to not assist, the duty to prevent the dehumanization of Palestinians, which is often overlooked. And of course, the dismantlement of the settlements. I mean, this is really critical, not just for Gaza, but also not just for the West Bank, but also for Gaza, because the military apparatus are part of the occupation and mandated by the ICJ to be dismantled. I'll slow down. Thank you. So we've got number one, the protection of civilians, the the supervision and monitoring of the withdrawal of Israeli forces and occupation and settlements. I'm so sorry. Is settlements, and then compensation, restitution, the preservation of evidence of war crimes, apartheid, crimes against humanity, genocide. Embargoes, and then obligations to prosecute. Now, I believe, and I am quite certain that these core tenets will survive, especially given all of the fluxes, all of the competing and kind of racing to the front of these various proposals, I think is in part a result of the pressure, mass global pressure, more than it is governmental pressure, to push ahead with a Uniting for Peace resolution that follows the parameters of the ICJ, which the UN General Assembly has already essentially adopted in another Uniting for Peace or another emergency session in October of 2024. So those are the basic tenets. Now, when a resolution is presented, it will be open for engagement, and that's where states come in and begin to negotiate the terms. I am particularly hopeful that the essential terms will survive, not just because of the sponsoring states, but because of the elements within that resolution, which are the only path to peace for Palestinians and in the occupied Palestinian territories.
Thank you, Lamis. I think it's really important that you unpacked some of the items beyond just the kind of the forces on the ground to help stop Israel's atrocities and safeguard Palestinian civilians from further violence and displacement. Some of the things around affirming Palestinian right to, self-determination and also, right to return for Palestinians. Ubai, I'm going to come over to you. Some of the questions that have been arising around this Uniting for Peace resolution, and more broadly, questions that are arising around what is the will of the Palestinian people in this proposal and others. Have the Palestinian communities been consulted? And does this represent the wishes of the Palestinian people, both in Gaza and in the West Bank and Palestine more broadly?
Okay, thank you for this. Look, the will of the Palestinian people is to be free from the occupation, to be safe in our homeland, to have our refugees that have been displaced and as a Palestinian people also in general dehumanized all over these years. As Palestinian people, we are living in historic Palestine under the brunt of a genocidal, nuclear, armed country that has one of the most sophisticated killing machines, using AI, using all sorts of equipment, using starvation as a weapon, attacking people in the West Bank, Gaza, and even in 48. So when we are saying that the Palestinian people want freedom, want dignity, want basic human rights, this is like a basic tenet for all. What we have seen across the past 2 years is from various countries, various UN organizations even, talking about security guarantees for Israel. Israel is a genocidal nuclear power that is heavily armed to the teeth. And it has proven that it's willing to do everything, even targeting toddlers for fun. We are the people that need the protection from it. This is when we're talking about this as Palestinian civil society organizations, as Palestinian non-governmental organizations network. We are talking about the daily discourse of people, not just in the West Bank and Gaza, but also of people in 48 and diaspora that are feeling the brunt of this occupation. The basic call for Uniting for Peace is actually a call for the international community to take up its responsibility regarding Palestinians and not treat us as subhumans, but treat us as equal human beings with precious lives that are worth protecting. And this is something I don't think that there's any Palestinian out there that's against, that's not calling for that.
And to push that a bit more forward, specifically around kind of the nonprofit and civil society infrastructure. I mean, we're seeing that everything in Palestine is under assault: the hospitals, the schools, the systems, the infrastructure. And so when we're talking here about the will of the Palestinian people, my question for you is, what does a transition plan to justice in the middle of this Uniting for Peace resolution look like from the Palestinian perspective?
Look, the first issue is that we understand that the US is as complicit in the Israeli genocide as the Israeli government itself, the US government, I'm saying, not the people, of course. And we're having the US as complicit and now pushing for stabilization force, for the complete separation of the Gaza and the West Bank from each other, for continuation of the genocide, like what we are seeing. Like a couple of minutes ago, we just got news that they bombed again Gaza City. So we are talking about a structure that is not working in any way to provide justice and freedom for Palestinians. As Palestinians, what we see at the heart of this international force of Uniting for Peace, that the UN force comes with a clear mandate. This has never happened in history, where a clear mandate was given to a UN international force to come and protect Palestinians. This is the mandate number one mandate. And the second mandate that we are talking about is also application of UN resolutions regarding Palestine. Any UN force coming here with those two clear mandates, which include ending the occupation, implementing 194, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, implementing the ICJ advisory opinion and the UN General Assembly resolution of ending the occupation, prosecuting war criminals and companies also and individuals that have profited from the genocide and occupation of Palestinians, compensating Palestinians that have been displaced for everything that happened to them all over these years from 1948 until today. We are talking that those are tenets, those are pillars of Palestinian rights. These are the rights that we as Palestinians want to achieve. We are not naive as Palestinian civil society and as Palestinians living with the daily monstrosity that the Israeli occupation is putting on us, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza. Every day, which has been called normal before October 7th and now after the ceasefire and during. Palestinians were killed on a daily basis without any accountability, without holding anyone accountable. From our understanding here, it's that the entire logic of the world is upside down. It's like the logic of the world is standing on its head. Israel, a nuclear armed power, is asking for security guarantees against the Palestinian unarmed, mostly unarmed population in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, that it has been killing on a daily basis, displacing on a daily basis, stealing our property on a daily basis since 1948 until today. As Palestinians, we don't have the right to life. You know what the famous video of the rape of a Palestinian hostage in Sidi Timan, the only one that is facing prosecution is the one, real prosecution and prison time is the Israeli that leaked the video of the rape, not the rapist. The rapists are running free and having press conferences and being celebrated as heroes. This is not the anomaly of the system. This is at the heart of the system. What we are calling for as Palestinians in our entirety, we are calling for justice and freedom. And this is at the heart of the Uniting for Peace resolution that is being pushed for. This is at the heart. What we are seeing to be honest, is the word that its countries are shying away, being complicit, and holding countries accountable to their discourse, holding politicians. This is an active and an efficient and just way of going forward, of achieving justice, peace, and freedom in Palestine.
And I think that's a very important point. Specifically, we're looking to apartheid Israel to somehow, control itself when it has repeatedly told us time and time again that it has no regard for international law, it has no respect for humans or humanity, and it has no respect for the will of the people internationally. But Craig, I want you to help maybe shed light on maybe a misconception around what is the blue helmets, or what are the blue helmets, and is this the same thing? What does that look like on the ground? What Ubai is talking about is kind of this international presence that will help protect the Palestinian people. What does this look like with regards to, the peacekeeping forces, and not who are the troops that will be there? How will it work technically?
Well, the UN deploys all sorts of forces, and the one that is best known are the so-called blue helmets, which is just a nickname for peacekeeping forces. But this is not a peacekeeping force because there is no peace to keep. What we're talking about here is a protection force with a very specific, limited mandate. A mandate to protect civilians, to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid, to preserve evidence of Israeli crimes, and to begin to assist in the process of reconstruction. Notice that we're not saying anything about meddling with Palestinian affairs, the governance of Palestine, who gets to participate and who doesn't get to participate, because that's none of the damn business of anybody but the Palestinians. And this proposal is, as Ubai has pointed out, was supposed to be like the next chapter in this drumbeat of accountability that started already in December of 2023, when South Africa initiated its case in the International Court of Justice, in the World Court, bringing Israel to trial for genocide. And after that, we saw a series of provisional measures by the World Court. We saw other opinions issued by the World Court declaring that the occupation was entirely illegal, had to be dismantled. Palestinians had a right to return. They have a right to compensation. They don't have to negotiate for their rights with their oppressor. It was a really historic series of issuances by the World Court that kept this drumbeat of accountability going. It was contributed to then by the issuing of indictments by the International Criminal Court against Israel's leaders. So we had reached a point where Israel was on trial for genocide. Its leaders were indicted for crimes against humanity. The General Assembly had affirmed all of this and declared that there must be an end to the occupation and to Israel's crimes. It gave Israel a one-year deadline that expired in the middle of September of this year in order to comply with all of these demands. Now, just before this deadline expired, you had all of Israel's friends at the United Nations working very hard to prevent any additional measures of accountability or protection being adopted at the UN. And that's how they came up with the French-Saudi proposal, the so-called New York Declaration, which, as Ubai hinted, is something that is not about, it doesn't address the genocide, the apartheid, even the occupation in a direct way. It's not about Palestinian freedom. It's very much about controlling the survivors of the genocide and protecting Israel and allowing Israel to consolidate its gains, its illegal gains, while it becomes more and more normalized. And it includes that proposal from France and Saudi Arabia, the New York Declaration. It includes the deploying of something that they call a stabilization force. But that stabilization force is effectively a colonial mechanism that would be put on the ground to control the Palestinians, and, as Ubai said, basically to help to guarantee the security of the perpetrator of the genocide, not of the people of Palestine. And because they want to do it under so-called Chapter 7, it could be imposed on Palestine against the will of the Palestinian people. And then Donald Trump also looking for a way to bail Israel out, came up with his 20 points, which is just pure 19th century colonialism that also includes this idea of a stabilization force, a colonial stabilization force, and external control of Palestine and its resources and its people, that has measures that punish the survivors of the genocide while rewarding the perpetrators of the genocide. And now, as we speak, there are diplomats in the Security Council working to try to merge Trump's proposal with the French-Saudi proposal to create a Frankenstein monster that would again be disastrous for the Palestinian people. One of the reasons they're doing that is to prevent this proposal, the proposal for a Uniting for Peace mechanism with a protection force and accountability measures for Israel. To prevent that from happening, they've come up with these Frankenstein proposals in order to stop that from happening. We are now something like 6 weeks since the deadline for Israeli compliance expired, and they have done nothing at all. And so people in this movement are pressing to say, reject those Frankenstein monster colonial proposals of France and Saudi Arabia and the United States and others, and adopt a mechanism that has been requested by the Palestinian people, that respects Palestinian agency and sovereignty and self-determination, and that doesn't meddle in Palestinian affairs. It just provides a mechanism of protection with a number of measures designed to hold the perpetrator of genocide accountable, not the survivors of genocide.
And it's a really helpful distinction. I want to turn it over to Lamis and ask you, Lamis, to expand on the different proposals that we're hearing about. Craig spoke to kind of the US, UK, France proposal. We've heard also about the Saudi proposal. How does the Uniting for Peace resolution connect to those? And if they do pass, what happens then to the Uniting for Peace proposal? Does it become obsolete? Does it get taken off the table? Kind of help us understand this political reality.
Sure. Yeah, so just to clarify, it is the French-Saudi plan that is being now merged with the Trump proposal. I can't even say the word peace or ceasefire. And they have essentially the terms that Craig just described. I mean, this is intended to be a political management of both the genocide in Gaza and what I think really has to be understood as the incremental genocide and ongoing escalated ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. That's really the essence of it. I mean, the French Saudi proposal essentially says as much. It doesn't address any of the basic rights. And I think what I'd like to offer here is something that I hope people can really elevate, and is to take a big picture of what's really happening. Is that the French, US, Saudi, I don't know if the UK is now involved or not, proposals are criminal proposals. They are criminal obstruction of the prior UN General Assembly resolutions and World Court findings. They are criminal obstructions of the inherent right of Palestinian people to live in freedom and dignity. I don't even want to go to self-determination. They are criminal violations of these jus cogens, these very basic, central, integral, internationally accepted norms and laws. They are criminal violations of their own erga omnes obligations, and they are criminal actions that give political cover and political protection to the illegal, genocidal, fascist, apartheid entity. And I think this really should be, I think, one of the leading lines to help us understand what's happening. On the other side is the Uniting for Peace proposal. Because it is not a criminal resolution, because it does not seek to entrench or expand and extend the life of, right? Because that's what these proposals are doing, intending to extend the life of genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, all of these things. You have the Uniting for Peace resolution, which no matter what happens with those other resolutions, technically, and I'll get into how this plays out in the real world, no matter what happens in those other resolutions, would survive and would remain unimpacted because it addresses the criminal situation, which none of them are addressing other than slowing down the bombs. I think that's the best that we've gotten, right? As Ubai said, our people are facing dehydration, starvation, deprivation, ongoing bombing. Okay, so it happens every second day, as opposed to every day on the hour. But the Uniting for Peace resolution outlives all of them. And another point that I neglected to share was that the Uniting for Peace resolution would not include complicit states, right? I mean, that's a generally accepted term. Why would those who have been supporting the genocide be welcomed to be part of stopping the genocide and occupation and all of these things? They wouldn't be. And that's another term of it. All of the terms would survive the ceasefire, must survive the ceasefire because it's in the name, right? It's Uniting for Peace, not a temporary peace, not a partial peace, not just more peace for Israelis from the world seeing what they're doing, because that's what really happened. But looking for long-term peace, which means dismantling the settler military occupation in the occupied Palestinian territories for now. I also want to elevate the urgency of getting popular and civil society support. So one point I'd like to add, if I may, if I have a couple of more minutes, is what's really interesting and powerful about the Uniting for Peace resolution is that the mandate of the intention of this resolution, right, which is to stop war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, sorry, I'm reading the messages to check if I need to slow down or stop. So sorry. That mandate supersedes anything that's happening on the ground, right? Even to some extent supersedes a fragmented, occupied people who aren't able to maybe come up with, a position on the Uniting for Peace, which is not the position. And in fact, the Uniting for Peace resolution is supposed to be responsive directly to civil society. And civil society in Palestine has made it clear from day one, Palestinians were, for 77 years, not just now, but certainly through the genocide, were screaming, وين العرب وين? وين الملايين? Where are the Arabs? Where are the millions? Well, the Uniting for Peace resolution is a mechanism to say, well, they're here, right? And this is our only mechanism to say that they're here. And I wanted to go back to my point before I interrupted myself, which is the urgency is not just the ongoing genocide. The genocide has not stopped. Stopping bombs does not, legally speaking, mean the genocide has ended because food, water, shelter are being used as weapons of genocide, right? Weapons of war. We have a critical crisis on our hands coming up now, and that is the initial passage of the bill to give the death penalty to Palestinian hostages, which, according to the ICJ and common sense, are in fact hostages and should never have been abducted by Israeli forces. This is absolutely terrifying, considering the numbers that are presently held hostage and the numbers that we can expect to be held hostage. I mean, this is the industrialization of an incremental genocide, right? Uniting for Peace becomes all the more critical now in terms of saving lives. I hope I've answered your questions, and I think actually, I'll leave my other points for later.
Thank you, Lamis. I just want to, again, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but I think that the details, the devil's always in the details in these things. So the question around this Trump proposal, because I fundamentally believe that some of these proposals were timed in order to dampen the international momentum that we had seen building around the world, both on the tail end of the Global Smooth Flotilla. You had mass shutdowns all over Europe, around the world, and advocacy for Palestine. You saw a increased attention and knowledge in the Uniting for Peace resolution. So my question, just to kind of dig a little deeper into this, is if the UN Security Council resolution prepared by the US, UK, France is rejected, maybe even a Chinese-Russian veto, or not getting the majority vote, does that mean that the phase 2 of this Trump peace plan, and I say, peace and in quotes, does that put it off the table? What does that do to the Uniting for peace resolution. I just want to try to understand politically where we are, because I think that will help people understand where we need to be building political pressure on governments in order to uphold and do the right thing. Craig, I don't know if you have an answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, well, for the Trump plan, he doesn't really give a damn whether he gets authorization from the Security Council or not. He's going to try to proceed, although it's pretty pie in the sky. They're going to the United Nations in an effort to try to give a stamp of approval to a completely illegitimate and in many provisions illegal proposal. So if they can get it, great. If not, they will try by other means. The Uniting for Peace proposal, if one of these Frankenstein proposals makes it through the Security Council, like the French-Saudi proposal or the Trump proposal, or what they're trying to do now is to merge them into another monstrous proposal. If that makes it through the Security Council, it does not present a legal bar to continuing to try to adopt the Uniting for Peace proposal that we've been talking about, but it will create more political hurdles. You need 2/3 vote in the General Assembly to adopt a proposal like this under Uniting for Peace. And some states will be pulled off by the distraction of the proposal that's being put forward by Trump and the French and the Saudis and others. And that will make it politically much, much more difficult to actually get this kind of proposal through. Now, you could imagine a proposal like this that includes everything except for the force, because they're not likely to authorize two forces at the same time in the same land, right? So you could imagine that the other pieces of the proposal could still move forward in the General Assembly, things about Israeli accountability and some of the things that Lamis was talking about as well. But the protection force would be threatened very much by the adoption of one of these, and let me say it again, one of these colonial proposals for a stabilization force that would be put in there to control the Palestinians and to ostensibly to control the resistance in Palestine and interfere with Palestinian sovereignty and self-determination. So that's why those proposals are so dangerous. And I don't know. I mean, those proposals, that piece of the Trump and French Saudi proposals is very challenged. When you had this kind of generic conversation like the one that happened in the General Assembly, when you had Gustavo Petro from Colombia and others talking about these issues, and you had countries like Indonesia pledging troops, they're not so enthusiastic about pledging troops to go into a colonial occupation force under the Trump plan or others. So I don't know that they will manage to get their plan through. I'm convinced that the Trump so-called plan is absolutely impossible, and thank goodness, because it's atrocious at the same time. So, the notion that even the first phase, which include an exchange of captives and a ceasefire, there has not been a ceasefire for even one day. There has been continued murders by the Israeli regime in Gaza. There has been continued denial of food and medicine and aid throughout this period by the Israeli regime. They've destroyed civilian infrastructure throughout this time. There hasn't been a ceasefire of even one day. So even the first phase, which was supposed to be the easy phase, has completely failed. The subsequent phases that are much more difficult to realize, I think, are unlikely. And that's why this is not the moment to give up on the Uniting for Peace proposal that we're talking about, because the diplomatic work needs to continue to push this forward so that when it all falls apart, as it is already falling apart, there is an option here that is lawful, that respects Palestinian agency, and that is focused not on trying to colonize the Palestinian people in an additional layer of colonialism, but in civilian protection and Israeli accountability.
Ubai, I want to come to you specifically around conversations around the PA. We've had a lot of different, I've seen a lot of different channels and different questions specifically around the PA approval. And I don't know if you can speak to this directly or speak to the kind of larger political context, but is the PA, the Palestinian Authority, which I'm going to, use the PA acronym, is the Palestinian Authority approval necessary for the implementation? And what happens if that's withheld? We heard a lot of the conversation during this last General Assembly about the Palestinian Authority and the UN Palestinian representatives not being, on board with this plan. So, can you speak to that, please?
Well, the Palestinian Authority does not represent the Palestinian people at the UN. That's the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the Mission of Palestine. The Mission of Palestine, these are two different bodies, although they are controlled by the same people. But the Mission of Palestine at the UN has called for international protection of Palestinians. What they have not pushed for is the mechanism. The Palestinian, the representatives of Palestine there, we are having conversations with them. I think one of the main advantages of the Uniting for Peace is also that the presence of these troops will be based on the invitation of the state of Palestine as the sole sovereign. And as we might not have a democratically elected leadership at this moment, that might not be the best or most efficient leadership, but this ensures if this proposal goes through and the UN resolutions regarding Palestine are implemented, then this ensures also that we have general elections, we have an accountable leadership that can, if they see that this force has overstayed its welcome, withdraw the legal basis for its invitation and kick it out. People need to understand we are not just going for a proposal for the short term. We are putting the international community in front of its responsibilities that it has failed to adhere to since 1948. Since 1948, the Palestinian people, through the different representations we had, whether it was the government of General Palestine that was based briefly in Gaza, the PLO under Shuqairi in the 1965, or under Yasser Arafat after that, or whatever Palestinian factions we have, Islamist or non-Islamist, civil society, all of those Palestinian bodies have had a single call for justice and freedom. And people around the world need to understand that we as Palestinian civil society, when we put this proposition for Uniting for Peace, we are not shying away and we are not begging the world to come and protect Palestinians. We are looking at the world leaders, at the people of the world in their eyes and telling them, this is your responsibility. You have failed. You should do better and stand up.
And I think that's a really important point about kind of how self-determination of the Palestinian people actually interfaces with this proposal, which I think is a source of a lot of confusion. I want to address some of the questions that are coming in from folks watching, specifically around the status of this, and then I want to kind of get into the implementation, given the political pressure that a lot of countries are also facing at hands of fear of sanctions of the United States and other political pressure. But we saw a huge push a couple of weeks ago during the General Assembly, where we saw the Colombian president Gustavo Petros announcing that there would be some resolution coming. So there's a few questions here in the chat box, and I know I've seen quite a few online as to where are we with this resolution. There was a strong sense of urgency. There was a strong push for this. And then there's been a moment of lull. And so folks that don't necessarily understand how the political process works and what it takes to build potentially political power to push this forward, the question, fundamentally is, where is this draft proposal? How and when will it be presented to the General Assembly? And the third piece of this is what is being done to build the political power in order to get a 2/3 of a vote needed in order for this to pass through the General Assembly. So Lamis and Craig, I'll let you both chip away at that answer, please.
So I'll start a little bit with where we're at. I mean, well, actually, no. I'll start with why did Colombia announce it? It was absolutely Colombia's initial intention to have brought it to the UN pending and conditional upon preliminary support from states and getting a sense of what states, where states are landing on this. Now, this was being promoted and marketed at the time that the Trump proposal was in the works, and a lot of governments were aware that the Trump proposal was in the works. And people wanted to sit it out and see what would happen with it. And I think we knew what would happen with it. And I think the Colombian government was well aware of what would happen with it. And we expected that ultimately we would have to bring the Uniting for Peace resolution. And the drafting and the logistics of how governments work, I think people overestimate the capacities and resources of governments, especially in the global south, legal, UN, diplomatic, even material resources. You'd be surprised. And given the dearth of issues that states in the global south, certainly Latin America now, are facing, it's a difficult ask. It's a big pull. It's a lot of work, internally, externally. It takes a lot to get this going. Right now, post-Trump plan, even though a repivot is needed, and that's what we're working on now, repivoting the draft, but also seeing where the Colombian government falls on the repivot and what they're thinking, and generally, and thanks to the people who've been advocating for this, Adrian being one of them who's done really a tremendous job from the beginning to really push this along. It'll have to be repivoted, and then the upside to the delay, and I'm not, it would have been great if it could have passed, but the upside is that there's further time to develop it based on these developments. And there's now more time to ensure that we can build the diplomatic terrain to get it approved, or to get at least preliminary approval. So what happens is once the Colombian government approves, inshallah, the updated draft, then we begin the soft kind of risk buffer of doing, one-on-one diplomatic outreach to get a sense of, who's going to co-sponsor. We already have one co-sponsor who I think will remain a co-sponsor in government. I'm hopeful about getting other co-sponsors, of course, and I am hopeful, I think, on the heels of the, I don't like to call it a failure, but in terms of a government perspective, the abysmal failure of the Trump proposal and this ceasefire. So I'm quite hopeful, and I did want to circle back, if it's okay, to just add to the issue of the PA's role. I think that sometimes gives people a sense of pessimism. But what international law and the Uniting for Peace resolution understand is that there is no sovereignty and there is no self-determination under occupation, and certainly not under genocide. And again, I reiterate, international law and this resolution recognizes civil society as the sovereign, civil society as being the owners of self-determination, right? And that makes sense. And I believe it was in Bosnia where there was a fragmented political landscape, and the Uniting for Peace resolution was brought without consent from the ground. Certainly we would expect from the technocrat government, and absolutely, Ubai and PNGO attesting to the fact that not just all of civil society in PNGO, but every Palestinian, I think not just even in Palestine, in the world, is begging for this resolution. And no matter what happens, Uniting for Peace is something that can be real, and it's not just a diplomatic effort. This is something that I've got to stress. What we've seen since the genocide, and as you've mentioned, Hazami, is the birth of new poles of power, parallel poles of power, alternate sources of power, from the global Samud flotilla to the mere narrative being elevated about the Uniting for Peace resolution. This is first and foremost really up to civil society to mobilize on, to believe in themselves about, and to really push it forward and know that the governments are now responding. There is no doubt in my mind that between GSF and all of the international public and private actions and the UFP kind of making a stir at the UN is why they pressed ahead and they raced to that finish line, which should affirm the fact that the power is within all of these people and organizations that are watching to be part of saying this is it, this is our demand. And UFP really is the end all and be all the Palestinians that have been begging for any sort of help. Most of the efforts, unfortunately, have been resigned to sanctions, embargoes, and prosecution, and that's all very critical, right? And that must survive always. But what we really need is we need a more affirmative force. Palestinians, as I'm sure Ubai and any Palestinian on the ground can confirm, cannot do it alone at this point. And the conditions are daily worsening. And I think it's critical that people really believe in it. Yes, it might take a while for us to bring it to the United Nations. We don't have the resources of the US and the UK and Europe. We don't have their criminal colonial interests and strategies, but we do have the masses, and the masses have proven themselves to be a powerhouse. They should believe in the Uniting for Peace resolutions. The Palestinian people have told them to believe in these resolutions, and it may take a while, but we need to build the terrain for it, especially as we're up against all of these other criminal colonial machinations. We really need the masses, all of us, to really stick to this and make this the top demand from all governments and from the UN. Yes, it will take a while before it is brought. I'm certain of that, but it will need a while for us to build that terrain. And with your help, it's really up to the people on this webinar, the people invested in Palestinian liberation, to determine the timeline as much as it is up to the governments.
Yeah, Hazami, I agree
Craig, go ahead.
I agree with everything that Lami said. This is basically, it's a strategy to try to turn solidarity into state action, because governments have done nothing over the course of 2 years to use the power that they have to put an end to the genocide. And this is one way to increase the political incentives for governments to take action at the demand of the solidarity movement from all around the world. So you've got, just step by step, you've got the idea has been spelled out in detail, researched, laid out there. There's a very clear idea on, the precedent and the legal avenue and the opportunity to do this and what should be included in this proposal. The draft resolution has been prepared, and it includes all of the elements that we have been talking about. A sponsor of that resolution has been secured in the form of Colombia. Gustavo Petro, the president, has committed to being the tip of the spear in bringing this forward. Diplomatic action has led to the identification of some potential co-sponsors, because you need co-sponsors, ideally from different regions, in order to push it through diplomatically. There is a movement in support of it that is led by Palestinians in Palestine and Palestinians in the diaspora, and that includes people working in solidarity from across the globe on these issues through all kinds of educational measures, movements, pressure, letter writing campaigns, all kinds of activities to try to push it forward. And then at that point, we ended up with this very nefarious move by the French-Saudi proposal and the US proposal that to some degree has derailed what it is that we have all been trying to do, or at least it has slowed it down very significantly, because they've taken the wind out of it politically for some states who might otherwise have already signed on to this. And then on top of that, Gustavo Petro, the Colombian president, who was the principal sponsor, made a speech on the margins of the UN and was immediately sanctioned by the United States government, pulling his visa, and now threatening to arrest him, to invade his country, every kind of lunatic Trumpist threat that is being mobilized in part because Colombia has stepped forward in order to support this initiative and has been pushing for Israeli accountability and Palestinian protection. And other countries are watching that bullying, that mafia technique of the United States, and that may be seeding some resistance. We've seen the absolutely shameful behavior of leaders of countries from around the world on their knees, worshiping at the altar of Emperor Trump, presenting him with prizes and gold crowns and Nobel Prize nominations and so on. I mean, it's really pathetic, the state leadership that the world has right now. Some of that, even in the global South, is very worrying. So this has delayed the process that we have been pushing for, and it has intimidated some states from being out there openly to participate. And that means the process has been slowed, I think, rather dangerously. So that means that whether or not this thing ever sees the light of day will depend upon pressure from people. It will depend upon mobilization in the capitals of the world, not New York, where the delegations to the UN are, but in all of the countries represented in the conversation we're having today. Pressure needs to be brought to bear on governments in each one of those countries to support this proposal, ideally to co-sponsor it, otherwise to vote for it, and at the very least not to oppose it. And in that formulation, the state of Palestine, the PLO representation in New York, can throw a wrench in the works. They can be pressured to try to interfere with this, because if other delegations then ask the Palestinian delegation, do you support this? And they say no, we'll lose others. Remember, we need 2/3. So this is going to come only, this was initiated from civil society, and it will be carried through only if there is a groundswell of support from civil society, pressing, yes, the PLO delegation, the State of Palestine delegation in New York, but pressing governments from all regions in their capitals at home, pressing the political leadership, the foreign ministries to support this initiative. If that happens, that is a power that is undeniable. There was a period in the UN in the 60s and 70s, just after decolonization, when all these newly independent countries that have been colonized suddenly started to exercise their power, where we actually saw some very important developments against the will of the United States and the French and the British and others, against the will of the empire. And that mobilization of power is right there, ready to be tapped, if we can press all of these governments to actually take that action. So everything is lined up. The trigger could be pulled, but in order for that to happen, we need that support in capitals around the world.
And I think that, there's some questions specifically around the timeline. And I don't know, Lamis, if we're able to say who the potential co-sponsor is, but, folks are asking for specific nuts and bolts and details in order to be able to pressure their governments. I think one of the challenges, and I want to address this issue really straight on, and I believe that that cannot be disclosed because of the fear of political pressure. And Lamis, I think you're actually messaging me to that effect, in the message portal. But I think part of the challenge with gaining global attention and mobilizing more action is the ambiguity and lack of information. Because people see an information void as lack of direction or lack of mobilization. And I think that is a truth that we must deal with as we're kind of galvanizing or attempting to galvanize the world in the midst of a genocide. So the question is, in a perfect world, where we got 2/3 of a majority of vote required, and Lamis and your teams worked magic at mobilizing attention around this issue. My question is, if all of this was approved and there was a green light and it said, yes, let's implement this and let's move forward in these implementation forces, what would be the timeline then from the date that this resolution passes the General Assembly to the date that we actually get this protective presence on the ground in Palestine? And it's a very important question, because we're talking about ending a genocide that is happening at such a quick rate and has been ongoing for 2 years. So are we talking 2 years from now, or are we talking 2 months from now? Can you please give folks context that are looking for more concrete information from what you can share in this space?
What we can offer is precedent and say, unfortunately, that look, even though this might appear to be stagnant, and I believe my colleague Ayman is also on this call, there's always a tremendous amount of work happening on this, folks. We have not slowed down on this. Adrian has not slowed down. I have not slowed down. I'm sure Craig and Ubai and Ayman have not slowed down. We do not stop, regardless of how stagnant things might appear on the outside. Diplomatic work, legal work around this must be a full-time endeavor for anybody invested in this. So there's something always happening. And I'll turn to your very critical question. Look, I'd like to give a sense of what it would look like should it pass. The first thing that has to happen is that the Zionist entity has to be formally notified, which happens through the UN General Assembly itself. So all of these notices are real basic of any law, right? When you serve a paper or you file a paper in court, you have to serve the adversary. So there's, a notice period, and then the preparations really depend on which states have agreed to join the multinational force, the multinational protective force, not a peacekeeping force, as Craig said. And then it's a matter of the logistics of basically opening air and sea corridors, right? And then the trickier part would be a matter of getting the neighboring states, Egypt and Jordan, to cooperate with, the entrance of humanitarian aid, the entry of the multinational forces. And I give this to give a sense of, these are the logistics involved from A to Z of the passage of the resolution to boots on the ground, friendly boots for the first time on the ground in Palestine is political, logistical, legal, a matter of political will, really. So I know that that's not a firm answer, but I think that the logistics can give people a sense of what are all of the factors that go into impacting what that timeline it is, but it is not years. And part of that timeline is determined by the resolution itself, which again, even upon drafting would be subject to engagement, i.e. negotiation and edits and input, etc. But in no circumstance is it 2 years. And I would say not even 2 months. It should be, and is it intended to be? It's an emergency session on an emergency agenda item, intended to be as quick as is feasible, and as quickly as the multinational forces are willing to move, given the context and the condition of this, anathema of a situation, unimaginable, truly unimaginable, unprecedented in all of history, I believe, not just modern history situation. So certainly quicker than 2 months, 2 years is not realistic. As Craig noted earlier, the timeline for the evacuation of settlement and military outposts in the West Bank has already expired. So these would be all factors that are considered by the resolution's timeline proposals. So I hope that that's a sufficient answer.
Yeah, Craig, did you want to chime in or Obey on the timeline?
I think that's right, and I think that technically there is no bar to this happening quickly. Uniting for Peace can be convened in 24 hours, and a resolution is already prepared. It could be adopted. The only the only delay, the only time restrictions are the amount it takes to build 2/3 in order for the vote to pass, and then immediately on the adoption of that, the Secretary General and his departments are instructed to start working with the relevant delegations to start putting together the force, the personnel, the money, the equipment, all of those sorts of things. And that can happen pretty quickly. There are precedents for that as well. So the only thing that determines whether it happens today, in 6 months, or not at all is political, is diplomatic, and the need to move that. And that's where we come in, all of us, in pressuring our governments to support this proposal as it moves forward.
Obey, I want to ask you specifically, I mean, we're talking about this timeline and we're also talking about a genocide unfolding in real time as we speak that continues to just wreak havoc on the Palestinian people. We are seeing every single day children being targeted and bombed. The other day alone, we had, over 46 children were killed overnight in ruthless attacks from apartheid Israel. So what does this interim plan look like where we know that more political pressure needs to be built to be able to implement sustainable solutions to stop Israel's atrocities? We also know that as we heard from Craig and Lamis, that the bullying of various, powerful international power brokers are hindering the support of some countries, where we saw, bombing of fishing boats, sanctions, and various other things. What does the interim solution look like for Palestinians to stop the atrocities? And how can we continue to encourage the world to build the political pressure needed to stop not just act as a stopgap, but actually stop this from being able to continuously happen over and over?
Look, when Trump made his plan on the stabilization force and peace council, all of that, from the very first day we understood that this was designed to fail, because this does not, like the hundreds of plans, I would say, before it that were devised, maybe I'm exaggerating hundreds, but dozens, let's say, at least, from Y River to Y Plantation to the Camp David, all of those plans all over the years, they all were failed for one specific reason, that they did not address Palestinian aspirations for liberation, for peace, for justice. Those plans were not centralized in all of this. And this plan, we understand that it's failing and it will fail. Today, I can give you some small figures, for example. Even the 600 trucks that were agreed upon by Trump as humanitarian aid entering daily, which is, I would say also, it's illegal to limit or put a cap on humanitarian aid. Even this figure, they did not achieve it. What's entering daily now into Gaza, around 150, 168 trucks, that isn't even enough to reverse the famine or even provide care for the people. The suffering of the Palestinian people is continuing. This is correct. And it will continue unless we centralize the question of, are Palestinians human beings? Do they deserve the same levels of protection? And what is the world ready to do in order to protect Palestinians? If you take all of the cases of genocide since the end of World War II, and you go to any Holocaust or genocide studies journal, academic journal, you would find that not a single case of genocide has ended before the genocider achieved their goal, without either direct international intervention, military intervention, or the failing and the falling of the regime that was perpetrating the genocide. And our Palestinian context isn't any different, I would say, from all of that. What Uniting for Peace puts forward, and I think this is the most powerful tool of it, it puts back the question of protection of Palestinians as a central question. It puts forward the centrality of Palestinian lives, that Palestinian lives are worth protecting. And it puts also the responsibilities on how the world is going to protect Palestinian lives. Is it going to send troops? Is it going to force Israel through sanctions? Is it going to apply complete boycott of Israel in order to achieve this? From my understanding of Uniting for Peace, what we see here is a path forward that is strong, that can actually happen in a couple of months if there is enough people internationally backing it up and putting pressure on their governments. And this is not a symbolic action. This is not an action to symbolically, for example, break the siege or to symbolically denounce Israel. This is an action that calls for responsibilities of states to be put forward and for states to act to rein in this genocidal Israeli government with its various policies of ethnic cleansing and genocide. For Palestinians, what we want for justice and freedom, it's really simple, implementation of international law. We do not want to bargain on international law. This is not an Oslo II, where we are bargaining about our rights, where we are having a semi-autonomy where the occupation redraws the lines of control. No, what we are putting here centrally is the emancipation and liberation of Palestinians from Israeli control. And I think this is why the US administration, the donors of Donald Trump, the Israeli government were so scared of this proposition. When Gustavo, I want to emphasize this, when Gustavo Petro spoke in front of a rally, in front of the United Nations, it actually caused an uproar because the very premise of the idea of uniting for peace is challenging US colonialism, Israeli colonialism, not playing by its rules.
And I think that's such an important point, is that this needs to be challenged, and we're going to continue to challenge these systems. And part of that, comes from understanding what mechanisms we have at play. I want to go, to dig a little further into the structural issues around the General Assembly. And, there's some questions here around the emergency special session under Uniting for Peace. Now, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm here with, experts, international law experts, is that the recommendations that come from these emergency sessions and from these resolutions are recommendations and thus are not legally binding. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Craig, I see you shaking your head, so please take us to class on this one.
Yeah, this is something that is often emphasized, especially by rogue governments that don't want to comply with the will of the international community. So it's true that only the Security Council has so-called enforcement power, right? Chapter 7 enforcement power. The General Assembly doesn't have that power, but the General Assembly doesn't need that power to do what we're talking about here because, and this is important, a force that is approved in the Security Council is going to be a force that the United States and the UK and France approve of. Any force that is approved of by the United States and the UK and France is going to be bad for Palestine. The United States acts as a proxy for Israel in the Security Council, and it's not going to let anything go through that Israel doesn't want to go through. And the bad thing is that under Chapter 7, that could be imposed on Palestine against the will of the Palestinian people. That's the enforcement power. The General Assembly doesn't have that power, but here it doesn't need it because what we're talking about is a consent-based force. The consent of the Palestinians would be the basis for it. So not to get in the weeds, but the International Court of Justice has ruled in very clear terms that Israel doesn't get a vote on this. Israel has no authority in the occupied Palestinian territory. It has no right to say yes or no to anything that happens there. The authority belongs to the Palestinian people in exercise of their self-determination. If the Palestinians say, we consent to this force, that force is in Palestine on the basis of that consent, not on the basis of Chapter 7 or the Security Council. And it is only legitimate as long as that consent is maintained. Because the last thing we need is another occupation force in Palestine, even the kind that has been imposed on Haiti, for example, which is one of the models that these people are looking at. So that's a good thing. Secondly, for the accountability measures, it's true that only the Security Council can impose sanctions, but the General Assembly can call sanctions, and the minute that they've been called by the General Assembly, all states have a right to participate in those sanctions. They are no longer unilateral acts, the aggressive acts. They are multilateral acts that have legitimacy. So the General Assembly can call for sanctions, and all the states in the General Assembly can go along with that. The same thing for a military embargo and any of the other measures that need to happen here. So it doesn't mean anything to say that these are recommendations in the General Assembly. It can act. The International Court of Justice has reviewed the powers of the General Assembly, and it is said that the General Assembly powers are not limited solely to declarations. They can actually mandate action. They can mandate a protection force. They can arm that force. They can deploy that force. They can call sanctions. They can call a military embargo. They can't then, enforce those measures. They can't use military force and open fire on some country that is refusing to cooperate. But of course not. That's not what we're talking about here. So everything that we are saying could be done under Uniting for Peace is done under the authority of the General Assembly on the basis of consent from Palestine.
There's a very legitimate question here around the term of the president of Colombia, which is due to end in May of 2026. The timeline that we heard from Lemis, and in light of that, how does the end of Petros's term impact the Uniting for Peace strategy, or does it?
Yes, I mean, certainly it does. Of course, we're hopeful about the incoming administration, inshallah, that will be elected. Maybe others are less so, but yes, I would say time is of the essence for that factor as well. So, because we don't know who would come in, right? If it is, the same party in place, we're not worried about it. If it is not, and there is some massive right-wing move, which is within, according to some, within the realm of possibility. It's been such a split between hearing from the Colombian street and governance and parties. And Adrian, who's on the call, is certainly better informed than I am in this, but for us, it's absolutely a factor. There's no question. And if I may just take this moment to kind of bring it back a little bit, Craig gave an absolute spot on answer, and Ubai has given us, I think, the most powerful frame of understanding the importance and urgency of this. But everything now at this point is dependent upon political will. That's where your question stems from, is will there be political will in Colombia? And political will is just another term for the people, for the masses, for you. Political will is you. Yes, there is a lot of power being thrown on, not just into, thrown on and against people who are mobilizing for real justice and liberation in Palestine. But those who are being pressured are also protected by you. Civil society works as a risk buffer for states. Civil society protects states. As we saw from the Global Sumud Flotilla, civil society leads and forces state action. Political will is you. I think Palestinians have spoken sufficiently to say, we want this, we need this, we trust this. And I think that, I really hope that folks really hear this call. And it's not just now that we're saying it, it's now that we're coming to this mechanism and saying, okay, this is it. But yeah, so I hope that answers, and I just wanted to add that.
It definitely does. And I want to use that as a segue into the last part of this as we're closing out on our time with what people can do. But I want to ask one final question just about the technicality. What options are there to not go through the United Nations? Because we did hear Gustavo Petros at one point say we were going to go through the UN mechanisms. And then at one point he said we're not going to go through a UN mechanism, just to clear up any confusion that there may be, as there's a lot of kind of questions as to is there a possible mechanism or a possible pathway for these protection forces outside of a United Nations system? Craig, go ahead.
Well, of course there is. I mean, under international law, all states are obliged to use whatever capacities they have to intervene in a case of genocide in order to put a stop to the genocide and to hold the perpetrators accountable. But what we have witnessed is that no states, perhaps with the exception of Ansar Allah in Yemen, who have intervened explicitly in order to oppose the genocide. No other states are in a position or are able to actually take the action that they need. And so the logic of the Uniting for Peace is let's provide an intergovernmental mandate that will give other states potentially the confidence to participate. They will have legal cover, they will have diplomatic cover, they will have multilateral cover to actually take action. It's just that it's much more likely that states will take this kind of action if it's under a mandate from the United Nations, right? It's just to make it more possible. Of course, in a moral world, all states would have intervened by now against the Israeli regime to end the genocide and the apartheid and the occupation and the colonialism. But we're, 80 years in now, and they're not doing it. And so this is an opportunity that we've seen to actually provide the political space for states that wouldn't otherwise participate. And yes, there is a risk here that we're putting all our eggs in one basket with the leadership of Colombia. Colombia is in the gun sights of the just bald imperialism of the United States right now, as is Venezuela and other countries. I mean, it is threatening them with coup d'etat. It is threatening them with military intervention. It is threatening them with the strangulation of their economies. It is threatening them with the arrest of their leaders on fake charges of drug trafficking and whatever else they can think up, right? The magic word they use to murder people in the Caribbean on small boats. So, there is strength in unity, and there is political cover in a mandate from the UN. And so this creates an opportunity to do that. And I just, before I stop this intervention, I would say it all comes down to, as Lamis was saying as well, it all comes down to the pressure that we can mobilize in individual countries to try to press our governments to be co-sponsors in this initiative. The Hague group of countries, Belize, Bolivia, Colombia, Cuba, Honduras, South Africa, Namibia, Malaysia, Senegal, and then all of that 30 or so countries that participated in the conference in Bogota. These are countries that rhetorically have aligned with the cause of stopping the genocide and enforcing international law. Colombia is one of those, but there are others who could be pressed to become co-sponsors. And if there's anyone on this call who is from those countries, that's where it needs to be mobilized. And at the international level, there's no shortage of groups you can work with. PNGO is the tip of the spear, Ubai and his colleagues. But there's PAGE, People Against Genocide, everywhere. There's Lifeline for Palestine with Jill Stein and her colleagues. There's Protect Palestine. There's Via Campesina. There's The Wave. There's all of these groups that are already engaged in this struggle, who you can plug into in order, also to move on national campaigns, because it's the national movements that will make the difference in pressing their states to become co-sponsors and to support this. Over.
Thank you so much for that. And I wish we had, countless hours more to continue to unpack. There's so much to unpack here, but we are coming at the end of our time. So, Ubai, I always feel like it is fitting to end with a call to action from Palestinians, Be Palestine, working on behalf of inspiring a global community to live up to our morals and our humanity. So, Ubai, in closing out, what are some concrete things that people can do that are watching from all over the world? There's a lot of questions around what actions can be taken, what actions should be taken, and how can people start to think about effectively mobilizing and advocating not only for this resolution, but for an end to the genocide, occupation, and apartheid?
Well, people need to consider themselves that solidarity is an action. And there are many actions to be taken. The first action that we promote here is pushing for the humanity of Palestinians, that Palestinian lives are sacred and deserve to be protected, and questioning your government, your officials, what are they doing for protecting Palestinian lives? The second is ending complicity in the genocide. This is boycotting Israeli companies, boycotting companies that are complicit in genocide, and pushing for sanctions from your government, from your universities to boycott and divest and impose sanctions on Israel and on the entities, whether they were economic, cultural, or whatever, that are complicit in Israeli genocide and Israeli occupation. A third thing is see if there's a Palestinian committee in your city, in your area. If not, start one. This is something really concrete. People, I think one of the main things that people can do is educating themselves and educating others. Try to establish the Palestine Committee, a committee for supporting Palestine. You'll find others. There are many we are seeing active. And when people come together, their power multiplies. These actions are all in the realm of the possible. They need just some dedicated time from people. If you can take off 1 hour per week, 1 hour per 2 weeks, 1 hour per month, whatever you can put aside, and just say this time is dedicated for my activism for Palestine. It will not be long, because millions of people, and I would say billions of people around the world, understand that they are never free unless we are all free. Nobody is free until Palestine is free. And this is our message from Palestine.
I mean, none of us are free until Palestine is free. And thank you to everybody from watching from all over the world. A massive thank you to our organizing team behind the scenes. A massive thank you to our interpreters who jumped on board last minute to help us be as accessible as possible. And we have more work to do to continue to become more accessible and have these conversations. I know there's a lot of people who are asking about ways to stay updated. I know Craig and also Anders and a few others have shared the various links. We are going to, moving forward, try to strategically organize some of this information so people don't have to sift through so many links and so many organizations to find information. And so that is a commitment that I know people are working on behind the scenes right now, is to try to decipher information, to give you concrete access to timely information to help inspire your activism, our activism collectively. And we will hopefully follow up with everybody. So I know some questions were unanswered. Please do stay in touch with us. The social media handles of all of our speakers were in the announcement information. And I know most of us are trying to be as available as possible to answer questions. But again, there were some resources that were also shared on the chats. And keep up with us, keep in touch with us. We need more momentum. We need more support. We need more mobilization, and we will free Palestine. It's not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if, apologies. It's a matter of when. And it is happening, and it will happen, and it requires more of us showing up and more of us activating and applying political pressure. So with that, Craig, Lamis, Ubai, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your wisdom, and thank you for your activism and your action in driving so much of this behind the scenes and in front of the scenes.
Thank you, Hazami, for everything you do.
Thank
Thank
you, Hazami, for all your work. I just want to add just one action point, if that's okay.
Yes.
We really do want people to also take the demand for joining and endorsing the Uniting for Peace resolution and the multinational force, and to sponsor that as one of the integral demands of any action or movement that's happening now. And this is not coming from me as an attorney, but from Palestinian civil society, as Ubai articulated. emails, phone calls, showing up at every door. I'm so sorry to go on. The US government, with all of its resources and capacity to pressure materially, when they wanted to advocate for something on this issue, they were showing up at European government doors 10, 15 times a day. And that's a government with immense power, understanding the need of that sort of tenacity, consistency, and insistence, right? So I do hope that people also mobilize on this in the same consistency that Ubai articulated earlier, and really please adopt it as a central demand around Palestine moving forward. I'm so sorry
No,
to have deflected the ending, but thank
No,
you.
you're totally right, Limis, and we need to do that. And I think the questions from a lot of people in the chat box is not the lack of desire to do it, but how, right? And so I think one of the things we will continue to do is to take the amazing work that you are doing, Limis, Craig, and Ubai, and find ways to share that, find ways to get that plugged in with what other communities are looking for with regards to direction. So we will continue to look to you all for direction on how to continue to make this go forward. And for everyone watching, we just need helping hands. We need people to dive in. We need people to take this information and spread it. We need you to show up at doors. We need you to knock on those doors. We need you to email. We need to be relentless in our pursuit for justice and peace and prosperity for Palestine. So with that, we will commit to, inshallah, providing more information and more resources and toolkits for people. I know a lot of people have asked for toolkits. So we will try to get more of that information into the hands of people